in case those of you on the call haven't yet engaged with the Delivery Associates Network, we've been commissioned by DLUC. We are a partnership of experienced delivery professionals from across 4 different organisations, and we're also supported by subject matter experts. And we're going to be providing support, guidance, advice to recipients of funding grants across the UK over the next until March 2025. And so we'll be here to support you across many different topics. This is just the first of many, and so we hope this will be helpful. If you go to the next slide, Lorena. There'll be lots of different ways that we'll be offering support and guidance through the network. So firstly, sort of one-to-one support, group learning sessions such as this, so webinars, working groups, etc. And also we've got a new Knowledge Hub website, which will host a lot of content, sort of from short blog posts all the way through to longer guidance pieces, and other sort of learning content as well. So that is it from me. Again, thank you for joining, and we'll be monitoring the chat. So if you've got any questions, do pop them in there. I'll hand over now to Victoria.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Victoria Huggett. I am a PMO and transformation programme specialist. I am facilitating the session today, and we have 2 excellent speakers with us. We have Marcus Foster, who is a hugely experienced project delivery lead, and has a sort of really diverse background in terms of types of projects that he's used to leading. He is also currently one of the delivery associates, so is working with a number of local authorities to support them in their delivery and working through some of their programme challenges. We also have Prenica Moody-Salter, who is an expert PMO and project controls specialist, and has provided extensive advice, guidance, support to public and private sector organisations, and is one of our SMEs. So they will be working through some content with you, and then we will be facilitating some questions. Thanks both. I'm going to hand over to Prenica.
Great, go off mute. Thanks, Victoria. So schedules are more of a science than an art, and there's lots of literature and guidance out there on the technical processes of building a schedule, the tools that you can use, the software you can use, and not least of all from the APM, which we'll quote extensively through this presentation. But given the time constraints today, Marcus and I will cover the basics of good practice and the most important principles. So we'll go through why have a schedule, what goes into a good schedule, building a good schedule, how to manage a schedule, what are the most common schedule risks, and what can you do when things get delayed. Next slide, please. So we'll go straight into it. And I'll start off by defining what a schedule is. So it's defined by the APM as the calculation of duration and resources required. It defines the logic and the sequence and the calculation of critical path, start and finish dates of individual activities, and determines the feasibility of delivering the project within the desired completion dates and budget. So that's a lot there. So paraphrasing that, the schedule defines the detailed activities that are required to deliver the scope of work, the logic of how those activities are sequenced, identifies the interfaces required, and the resources needed to deliver those activities. So to give you a few hard stats of why scheduling is so important, there's a book that's been published recently, and it's called How Big Things Get Done by Professor Brent Flyberg, and he consulted on over 100 projects globally, costing more than $1 billion. And his analysis concluded that 91.5% of projects go over budget or over schedule or both. And 99.5% of projects go over budget, over schedule, under recover benefits, or some combination of those. And that means that only 0.5% of projects actually succeed. So that's an astonishing statistic, really. And he concludes that projects don't go wrong, they start wrong. And he talks about the concept of think slow, act fast. Often projects are rushed at the very start. Everyone wants to get a spade in the ground, for example, and there's a really quick start. So without adequate consideration given to things like potential alternatives of how to progress the project, risks are not properly explored, solutions to problems aren't properly considered, and not all stakeholders are engaged, and there's over-optimism really when it comes to completion dates. So onto some basics then of why scheduling is so important. It provides a really clear map for how your project or program will be delivered. It helps us to make some decisions about how we want to progress. It concentrates effort on the most important tasks and activities, considers working time, considers any contingency that might need to be applied. It defines the sequence of activities and optimizes those activities so the project goals can be achieved, quantifies the resources that are needed, quantifies the costs that are needed and how those can be optimized, and defines the scope of work. Next slide, please. So before we go into what a good schedule kind of looks like, I'll briefly cover where the schedule comes from. The precursor to the schedule is a set of requirements for the project or program, and requirements are really the foundation for the schedule. And your requirements can include your technical specifications, user specifications, regulatory requirements, or other important criteria that will make the project successful. So I'll pick on a few items from the slide, things that go into a good schedule. So identifying the critical path. This allows you to prioritize and allocate resources on the most important tasks in the project. And the APM defines the critical path as the series of activities or tasks within a project, none of which can be delayed without affecting the project end date. And this is a really important component in scheduling because it helps to let stakeholders know which tasks or activities can't be delayed without impacting the end date. And in my experience, the critical path milestones are usually those pretty PowerPoint charts that get produced to communicate to the project board or senior execs how the program is progressing. Dependencies, so these are the links between activities which determine their sequence, and if they're delayed, will impact the completion of others. So good practice is to have a dependency log showing internal and external dependencies, and it's really important that those are monitored throughout the course of the project lifecycle. The baseline. This is the approved plan for the project against which project performance is measured, facilitates decision making. So the important word there is approved, and that's usually done by the project board. And the project scope must be agreed before the project schedule can be baselined. And you'd normally set the project baseline as you enter the execution or implementation stage of the project. If you're using the REBA lifecycle, it's construction delivery, REBA 5, getting into contract. Really important as well, you want to look at both left to right planning as well as right to left. Left to right planning is a sequential process that's commonly used for waterfall type projects. So when you look at breaking down the tasks, sequencing them in a chronological order, and then estimating the resources and their duration. Whereas right to left planning focuses on looking at the end goals and determining what needs to be done to reach those goals. They both have their place in project management and can be used depending on the specific type of project. So I'll now hand over to Marcus to go into the schedule hierarchy. Over to you, Marcus.
Thanks, Prenica. So what goes into a good schedule in terms of the information and who needs that information? We look at the project schedules in terms of the level that the information is distributed at. So looking at a level 1 schedule is really high level dates, high level milestones. Looking at the other end of the scale of that, level 5 is a sort of a microscopic detail of the information and activities that are being completed within the project or within any work package. But if I just talk very briefly through each of those levels, that'll give you an idea of who we're targeting with that specific level of schedule, and how much information we believe they need. Of course, this is all about communication. This is how we communicate, where the project is at that point in time. So a level 1 schedule is typically used for project steering group meetings, for the exec board meetings. That's the executive summary. We're looking at the major milestones on the project. It's normally only a 1-pager, whereas a fully expanded schedule could be 40 or 50 pages long, which it really wouldn't have any place in a exec board meeting. But that will highlight major project activities and those milestones for the whole of the project. When we go down to level 2, it's a bit more detail in terms of we require a level 2 schedule and also a level 3 schedule for project management reporting, more around stakeholder management for level 2. But that's, again, it's just a slightly more of a breakdown of the level 1 schedule, and we're breaking the program down into its major components. So it's really still at a high level of management reporting. With the level 3, we start looking at the critical path with that level of breakdown. So we would maintain that level 3 schedule as an integrated roll-up or a summary of the level 4 and level 5 schedule and those activities. But we're starting to get into the granularity of the schedule after level 3, and there's a break really between level 3 and level 4, typically around which stage of the project you're at. Once a contractor or a delivery partner has been appointed, the schedule will be further developed into level 4 activities, and that type of breakdown and that type of program we would use for review meetings with delivery partners, contractor teams, with workstream leads. We're talking about at level 4 a really detailed working level schedule, and we've expanded now into as much information as we really require. The level 5 schedule beyond that, we are talking about specific tasks. It's a further breakdown of level 4. We would use that to map out tasks for a day-to-day work, or perhaps work over a specific week in a specific area of the project. So we're going from a very, very high level summary right down to the granularity of level 5. There's a time and a place for all of these detailed schedules, but I think from a project management level, level 2, level 3 is a good level of information without drowning in the detail. So I'm going to pass back to Prenica. So thanks.
Thanks, Marcus. Thank you. So we'll now go on to looking at building a good schedule. So what are the key things that go into a schedule? And I'll rattle off a few things here. So the deliverables. So these are taken from the project scope. The tasks and their start and end dates. The task dependencies. So think internal and external dependencies. Your key milestones. Your project calendar. Work breakdown structure. Budgets, resource availability, any approval gateways which are linked to your life cycle, and any risk analysis as well. And the really important thing is to avoid any issues with your schedule. It's really important to consult a wide range of stakeholders prior to baselining your schedule, but then also throughout the project life cycle by having regular stakeholder input. And this will ensure that you've taken as many views into account when estimating what the tasks are, the duration of those tasks, and the dependencies, etc., to get their full buy-in. Next slide, please. So there's lots of times, probably all seen this, where a project schedule is produced at the start of the project lifecycle when limited details are known. And then, I suppose, so the reasons really for having this slide is to remind you that scheduling happens throughout the project lifecycle. And as you understand more detail about your actual project, then the schedule becomes more dense. So in essence, continue to monitor the schedule throughout your project lifecycle so that it continues to be fit for purpose. The Infrastructure Project Authority defines some really good lessons learned for major infrastructure projects when it comes to scheduling, and I'll go through a couple of those. So the first one is maintain ongoing focus on your benefits as well as your cost and your timescale. So remember that your schedule impacts pretty much nearly everything on your project, including your benefits. So if one thing changes, be mindful that it's going to have a knock-on impact. Avoid setting a committed in-service or end date before there's positive evidence that that's realistically achievable. So caveat dates as provisional wherever possible. Use a range showing the best and the worst case dates. And having aspirational end dates should be recognised as provisional by senior execs until they've really been subjected to that bottom-up and left to right, right to left planning. And as important as process is behaviours. So when it comes to good schedule management, the number of times I've seen projects fail because project managers are too afraid to admit delays or thought they couldn't recover something that went wrong without reporting it. So really foster a culture of transparency and early warning, supported by progress reports, focused on your cost and your schedule variance. So, and let key decision makers know really when your schedule tolerance is going to be breached, so that they can take decisive action. Over to you, Marcus, going to cover more on how to manage the schedule.
Thanks, Monica. So yeah, how to manage a schedule. It's a fairly straightforward diagram that we're looking at, starting with developing the robust plan in the first instance. When we're managing projects on site, when we're managing projects at design stage, we should always be reviewing on a regular basis that schedule, the design program, the master program, the delivery program. We need to understand what slippage has taken place. We need to understand if that's going to affect our change management policy, and we need that assurance from all parties that either any delays can be recovered or why we've gone out of sequence sometimes on the delivery side. So as a minimum, your delivery partner or contractor should be providing an updated position of the schedule, regular weekly, fortnightly or monthly progress meetings. That should be taking place definitely as a regular meeting, and it's important that that's communicated back and forth. It's typically part of a contractor's obligations to provide that update on program. There are a number of techniques on how to monitor progress and monitor that schedule. I particularly prefer the drop line approach, where the delivery partner will present you with the Gantt chart for that period, typically looking back a month and ahead a month, so overall probably a 3-month period. And that drop line would be indicated on the specific date of the meeting. By using the drop line method, you would be expecting the delivery partner to have made an assessment of percentage complete of every activity on that schedule, and very simply the date line, the drop line, will pass through all the activities that should have been undertaken or in the process of being completed, and the percentage complete will give you an indication of how far advanced or in delay that particular activity is. That's quite an effective method, and what it does, it means you can then look back at that program or the schedule and see what is falling behind and what the trends are of why those particular activities haven't been completed. It's also important to mention that even if you are behind on a particular activity, there is normally some buffer or allowance, time allowance within the schedule, which means that potentially some of those activities can slip. They also may not be 100% complete. They may be 20% or 60% complete, for example. But it is important to make sure that there's a regular update, and we've really got sight of any problems as they may appear to be realised. So yeah, regular review meetings, including all project team members, and also co-ownership of some of those activities. So different parts of the client team, different parts of the delivery team are responsible for monitoring and making sure those activities are taking place and they are being delivered on programme. Any formal adjustments to the schedule need to be followed through with the change management protocol, and typically we're talking about early warning notices, potentially leading into compensation events. So the contractor should be notifying you, or the delivery partner should be notifying you if there is a delay, and how they plan to mitigate that delay. If the delay can't be mitigated, if it's been realised through a different set of circumstances, then an agreement needs to be put in place as to how that time could be recovered, or what the potential cost impact for any additional time on the programme would be. So I've mentioned early warning notice and compensation events. There are different nuances depending on which contract you're in, but typically you'll recognise those terms. And also then just talking about the assurance and perhaps any mitigation to those delays. We could be looking at options whereby we reorganise some of the activities to bring progress back on track. We could be having conversations with the delivery partners about utilising some of the buffer time allowance, some of that float in the programme, and we can also let some of those activities slip if there is sufficient buffer and it's set out. So it is important that the contractor and the project management team have looked at these different options and are having those conversations as the project progresses. So if we can just go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the risks that we typically come across within a schedule, this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are fairly typical of what you might be looking at in terms of financial impact or delays, etc. And I'll run through briefly these. I'll try and give you an example of each of these in terms of that specific risk. So from a resource risk, I think it's important to have continuity within your team, making sure the key people who are appointed to deliver the project, they're not about to leave, taking their knowledge and their capability. That's typically something that will happen on a project, and so sometimes you're starting from the beginning again, and you lose a little bit of time in bringing people up to speed on the project. Equally, in terms of a resource risk, a lack of resource from a subcontractor could cause you delays on site and could lead to activities not being completed on time. In terms of scope uncertainty, we'll always try and minimise scope uncertainty. It's almost a gift in the hand to the delivery contractor in terms of extensions of time. And when we talk about the extension of time, it's inevitably going to cost the project money. If we can firm the scope up as much as possible before the start of the project, and certainly before we get into contract, then that's a good mitigation strategy for the scope risk. Infrastructure risk. We'll all know about the recent train strikes. I know I do. I've caught about 4 trains in the last month, and I've brought the train out and the bus back. You know, and on a serious note, this really does affect the road networks. It affects deliveries. It could affect you physically being able to get to site, and not just delivery drivers, but you know, when we're talking about materials, which we come on to materials risk shortly, any of the road closures, diversions, can all have a knock-on effect on critical path milestones. So really important that these risks are considered when building up that schedule, and the correct time allocation you know, is brought into place. Two really big risks in terms of infrastructure can be electrical supplies and water supplies to site. The applications for these utilities can take up to 6 months, so really important that consideration has been made around those utilities. In terms of performance risk, there are scenarios where we, you know, embark on the journey with our delivery partner and they don't perform. During the procurement of the delivery partners, it's really, really important to ensure that any questions within the procurement which require evidence of, you know, similar projects which have been delivered and what the experience of that proposed delivery team are included in that procurement. That's a really fair way of evaluating the suitability of your delivery partners, and it also helps to mitigate any of that performance risk. In terms of design risk, design should be fully coordinated, which will avoid any redesign work during those REBA stages. I have delivered projects in the past where the design hasn't been fully coordinated. We've done clash detection, we've had to move doorways, we've had to move windows, we've had to reduce and increase the floor heights and depths, etc. So really, really important to make sure that not only civil structures and architectural design are coordinated, but also with mechanical, electrical, public health, etc. So that is a typical design risk. Weather risk, yes, I have noticed it rains in the UK. It does also, there seems to be a trend that projects don't tend to start until later on in the year, and we sometimes end up in the ground in the winter months. We're trying to lay concrete at the wettest and coldest time of the year. It's quite a challenge to sometimes plan the timings for these projects, but these can have an adverse effect on the program and the schedule, and we can see slippage just simply because the weather's not suitable for the activities being taken on site. The dependency risk, not achieving any specific milestone could potentially have a knock-on effect to the overall schedule. For example, perhaps, you know, signing off part of the budget when the key person to sign that off is on leave and responsibilities haven't been delegated to somebody else. We sometimes see delay in progressing to the next part of the schedule. So dependencies sort of run all the way through the schedule. So it's really important to make sure that the right people are available at the right point in time. And then the final risk that we have is the materials risk. We've seen a shortage of materials during lockdown, over the COVID lockdown periods. I was delivering a data center in Manchester, and some of the prefabricated modules for all of the services weren't available because the materials to manufacture those simply weren't available as well. Cable tray wasn't available for running services around that particular facility. So we did manage to get over the problem, but we had to make the modules out of Unistrut, which cost more. It had a time delay. It affected the overall activity period. So important to make sure that any special orders, that we're checking lead times for special orders to make sure those orders can be delivered on time, and also that all those orders are clearly detailed in the procurement schedule, which you should have received from the delivery partner or main contractor. So I think that covers the common schedule risks. As I say, there are a few other risks which we do realise, but that's a typical sort of example of a number of the ones we come across. Okay, back to you, Pranika.
Thank you. So what can you do when things are delayed, and inevitably you're going to get delayed or delays on your schedule? So the first thing, always identify the root cause. So really important to look at that so things don't go wrong again. Ensure you have sufficient schedule contingency. So depending on the stage of your project, the APM suggests allowing for 10 to 20% of time contingency. So the more complex and the more risky you think your project is, the more time contingency to allow. Reassess your schedule, allocate additional resources if possible, but remember that likely has cost implications. Prioritize or deprioritize certain activities. Again, remember your contractual commitments. Negotiate with key stakeholders. Honesty is always the best policy in this regard. Implement risk mitigation or issue resolution. And seek expert advice. A bit different really to just getting more resources, but actually look for subject matter experts that can help you look for solutions and innovative ways to get your project back on track. Marcus, do you want to add anything to that slide before we hand over to Victoria?
Yeah, I was only going to just add in terms of contract implications. I think it's important to understand the contract that you're in with your delivery partner. There can be pain gain mechanisms set out in the contracts which actually work in the favour of the contractor. So it's within their interests to try and deliver as quickly as possible. There are clauses set out in certain contracts where they can be penalised for late delivery. So the contract can be used as a quite an effective project management tool in those instances. But I would really reiterate having a really clear client brief at the start of this to ensure that the schedule is fully aligned with your client brief, your employer's requirements, that activities are all captured, and that it is regularly monitored throughout the whole of the project life. But yeah, I think that's it, Pranika, from me.
Thank you. Back to you, Victoria.
Thanks both. So we will now move on to the Q&A section of the session. So we're going to stop the recording now.